Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever, whenever you're listening. Thank you so much for making me a part of your day. My name is Lee Parham. You might know me as Lego Lee or Lego Lee 329 from YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, Twitter, you name it. And today is a very special day. Why, you may ask? Well, today is the first ever episode, the inception, the beginning, the birth, the inaugural episode, the pilot, whatever analogy, whatever fancy word for first you want to use. This is the first ever episode of my original Lego podcast that I have named Brickology. Yes, you heard that correctly. Brickology. This has been a brainchild of mine for a very long time, for a few months, and I have been messing around with this, trying to figure out exactly how I wanted to make this podcast, and I didn't know when to make it, how to make it. I am very inexperienced in the whole podcast game. Now, I have been making YouTube videos for more than a decade, so I think I'm pretty experienced, talking on camera, but just recording my voice, not quite as experienced here. So if this just downright sucks, I apologize, but forgive me. Be patient with me because it's my first full-time podcast recording. I have made a couple of random student projects. I took a couple audio production classes in college. I have been featured on other people's podcasts a few times, and I even ran my own radio show. But this sort of thing is pretty new to me, and there's going to be some growing pains. So I just ask you to please be patient. I promise I will get better, and I want to make this the best possible podcast I can. Now, before we get started with what I'm going to do today, I'm going to tell you a little bit just about this podcast. Kind of what this podcast is going to be, what Brickology is all about, the origins, the idea, and the total. See, I'm already messing up. Like I said, new to the whole podcast game, the whole goal for Brickology as a podcast. Now, Brickology, the idea first formed in my head when I was actually listening to a different podcast. I was driving to go see my brother in Jacksonville, Florida. It was a 7-hour long drive. So, in typical long drive fashion, you're trying to find things to listen to. So I asked my friends on Instagram, what should I listen to? One of my friends suggested I listen to a podcast called Ologies. So yes, I did kind of rip off the name of Ologies with Brickology, but it's not like a word that this person owns or anything. It's a generic term, and I created the term Brickology here. So, essentially, I listened to this podcast, Ologies. Now, Ologies is hosted by a woman named Allie Ward. And Allie, what she does each week is she interviews somebody who's a different kind of ologist. So she might interview somebody who's a zoologist. A zoologist studies, shocker, animals. A paleontologist, you've probably heard that term before, like Alan Grant in Jurassic Park. He's a paleontologist. Paleontologists, they study dinosaurs and fossils. So she interviews somebody each week who's a different ologist, and she kind of cracks down on them and tries to learn as much as humanly possible about their field of study. And she has some that are, pretty basic categories like zoology or biology. And then she has some where somebody's like a scorpionologist. They study scorpions, something super specific and basic. And those are the most interesting episodes because you learn about something really specific. And I want to do that for Lego. And I am being kind of self-righteous here. I'm not a guy who likes to brag or boast about myself. But I think I'm worthy of giving myself this distinction. I'm going to call myself here an unofficial, obviously this is not a real term, but I'm unofficially giving myself the unofficial title of a brickologist. And the whole tagline for this podcast is going to be the study of small plastic bricks. I'm being real cheeky and funny with that there. Essentially, I'm calling myself a Lego expert because, look, my name online, my YouTube channel name for over a decade is Lego Lee. It just so happens that my name is Lee and it begins with L-E like Lego does, but I have made the word Lego and my name Lee like one and the same, like they are synonymous. Like, when people see me, they're like, oh, hey, it's Lego Lee. People don't really call me Lee, it's Lego Lee, right? So I think the fact that I've been collecting Lego for pretty much as long as I remember, I have over, I think, 2,000 sets according to my Brickset account, and the fact that my name and Lego are pretty much two peas in a pod together, I think that I am worthy of giving myself the distinction of a brickologist. Now look, even I, a self-appointed Lego expert, I don't know everything there is to know about Lego. I'm sure I'm going to speak in these videos, See, look, I'm already misspeaking already. I'm sure I'm going to make mistakes, and I need to do research. I did a ton of research for today's first episode. I will do even more research for future episodes if this continues. Be patient with me, and I'm going to bring in, hopefully, if this podcast, kind of catches on, I will bring in experts there are plenty of Lego fans. There's probably a Lego fan out there that knows way more about Lego Ninjago, for example, than me, or someone who knows more about Lego Legends of Shima, or Minecraft, or you name it, whatever, Friends, whatever theme. Essentially, though, let's get to kind of explaining what this is. The way that Allie each week explains a different study of something, I'm going to do that, but make it very specific to Lego. So instead of explaining a different, theme, like different science, like Allie does in her podcast, I'm going to kind of break down and explain a different Lego theme or sub-theme if the theme is too big each week. So, for example, there might be an episode where I break down the history of Lego Minecraft and what Minecraft means to Lego and how the theme started and why it's been popular and successful. Some of the best sets, just highlight all what the stuff that's important about Lego Minecraft. I'm going to do that each week, and some themes are huge. There's a theme like Lego City, where, I can't do all of Lego City in an hour long or however long these podcasts end up being. That would be, way too crammed, way too quick. So instead of doing, one broad city episode, I'll square in a little bit. And I'll choose like Lego City Fire, a sub-theme that I could break down in an episode. And each week I want to break down, uncover the history, the importance of this theme to Lego as a whole and as a brand, kind of how it's done financially, and all of that fun stuff. And I figured, what better way to start off this Brickology podcast than by talking about Lego Star Wars. Now, obviously, Lego Star Wars, there's like 700 Lego Star Wars sets. I cannot do that in one episode. I don't think I could do it in 10 episodes. So we're really narrowing it down with Lego Star Wars here. And we're going to go back to the beginning. The first Lego Star Wars sets and the first Star Wars film, chronologically at least, not release date. And you've probably caught on by now, and obviously it's probably in the title of this episode. The first ever episode of Brickology here is going to be about Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. So Lego Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. You might think that I would just simply sit here and be like, yeah, the sets came out in 1999 and these are all the sets, but no. That is not the goal of Brickology. I want to dive deep into the history, the lore, if you will, of Star Wars Episode 1 toys, Star Wars toys, Lego as a brand. There's a lot to cover here. And I think the important place to start is with Star Wars toys just in general. Now, there are going to be a couple of sources that I'm going to be using throughout this episode, and I'm sure I'm going to reuse them in future episodes. The first one, of course, is Brickset.com. I'm pretty sure if you're a big Lego fan, you know what Brickset is. If you aren't, I'll explain it to you very quickly. It's like a big database for Lego. It's like IMDb is the Internet Movie Database. That's essentially IMDb for Lego, and you can catalog your collection of Lego sets, list what sets you want, review Lego sets. It's a huge, awesome website. I love Brickset, and Brickset has all the information you need to know about Lego sets. So I went on there to find all of the Phantom Menace Lego sets I could. So thank you to Brickset. Also, a big source I'm using is 2 episodes of a particular TV show. There is a short kind of mini-series, docu-series on Netflix called The Toys That Made Us. There's, I think, 12 episodes, and The Toys That Made Us actually kind of does a similar thing that what I'm doing. They kind of, explain the history of a different toy in like an hour-long documentary-style episode. So they have an episode for My Little Pony, Transformers, Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, whatever, you name it. And of course, obviously, The Toys That Made Us has an episode about Lego, and they also have an episode about, of course, Star Wars toys. So I got a lot of the information that I will be sharing in this episode, and I'm sure a bunch of future episodes of this show from that show. I highly recommend you check out that show on Netflix if you can. Now, let's talk about Star Wars toys, because Star Wars toys have such an interesting history. I mean, it seems so normal to have tons of Star Wars toys now, and you wouldn't really think about them being this big significant thing in the history of the toy industry, but they really are. Now, Star Wars toys first came out in 1977-78. Now, of course, that's the year that the original Star Wars film came out. It came out May 25th, 1977. And Star Wars was this movie. It's a weird movie with a small budget made by a filmmaker who hadn't really broken into Hollywood, and George Lucas. And George Lucas had this big film. No one really knew what this was going to be. People thought it was stupid. Some of the actors even thought it was stupid. Like, Star Wars was kind of written off before the movie even came out, which is so ironic to think about now because of how huge Star Wars is as a property. But back in the day, Star Wars was not considered to be this big thing. People weren't thinking this was going to be some crazy huge action franchise. And I think Star Wars is one of the, the few films like that, and Jaws are one of the few movies from the 70s that you look back on that kind of birthed the big blockbuster movie series. And I think Star Wars, a lot of, popular series today owe a lot to Star Wars. But that's not really what we're talking about in this podcast. What we are talking about is Star Wars toys. And Star Wars toys, kind of like how the movie was not considered to be this, attractive property, the Star Wars toys were written off. Like, George Lucas went to all of the big-wig toy companies, the Mattels, Bandai's, Hasbro's of the world, and was like, hey, you want to make some toys off of my weird movie coming out here? And they were like, no. They, thought it was stupid. They didn't think it was good, and they didn't bite. No one did. None of these big companies did. So, of course, a small toy company called Kenner, based out of Cincinnati, Ohio, they were the ones that took a chance. They took a chance on making Star Wars toys. But because of all this stuff, all of the problems they had with the production of the toy lines, the toys were not released synonymous with the movie. Today we have these big Force Friday launch events for Star Wars toys when they release all the toys at midnight on a Friday, and it's usually like 2 or 3 months before the movie comes out. That is not what happened with the original Star Wars film. It actually took like a year for these toys to get out there, which is kind of odd to think about because the movie, of course, the movie is like one of the highest grossing movies of all time. It made like $775 million in 1977, adjusted for inflation. That's like almost $3 billion or something absurd. Like, this movie, of course, just made boatloads of money. It's ridiculously popular, and of course, there's tons of cool ships and new figures and characters in the movie, so there's going to be tons of cool toys. But the toys, you know what? They're not even out. But when they do come out, finally, after the movie is released, it's an absolute bonanza. It's a frenzy to get Star Wars toys. The action figures weren't even accurate. Some of them were the complete wrong color. I mean, there's a whole plethora of issues with these toys. They're very simple, but it doesn't matter. Star Wars is just that popular. Kids, adults, fans around the world alike are freaking out about Star Wars toys. And Star Wars toys quickly become the most popular toy brand in the world. I mean, it's the most popular movie series in the world, so it's not too surprising, but it's kind of crazy that Kenner, this small toy company, all of a sudden has this insanely huge toy property with them. And Star Wars toys, they continued their popularity and success going into the 80s. 1980 is when The Empire Strikes Back came out, and of course 1983 is when the original trilogy of films completed with Return of the Jedi. So Star Wars toys, they're huge, they're big, and they're being based off of these original Star Wars films. And then in 1983, George Lucas completes the original trilogy, concludes the story of Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Darth Vader, Princess Leia, you name it. At least, he did for a bit, we thought. At least George Lucas completed his story, is what I'm saying. And then there was no new Star Wars. And Star Wars toys kind of went into this weird dark ages. Like, obviously, this is Kenner's biggest toy property by a mile. So they're going to keep making Star Wars stuff. But there really isn't any Star Wars stuff. Now, there are plenty of random properties to come out from Star Wars. Those that are strange, like Ewok films. And there's a lot of books, like in comic books. The expanded universe, which is now known as Legends, because Disney, when they bought Lucasfilm, just erased all of that from Star Wars canon. It's no longer canonical. They had to make stuff based off of all of this and remake, toys from the original trilogy of films. And Star Wars toys took a turn for the worse. From 1983 until the mid to late 90s, Star Wars toys just weren't what they used to be because people didn't really care. People didn't care enough about the books or these weird side stories. I mean, hardcore, real Star Wars nerds at the time. I'm sure they cared, but I don't think a kid is going to go to a Toys R Us and be like, oh, look at the Shadows of the Empire action figure. Like, that didn't happen. Like, that's not what happened. In Star Wars toys, the sales, they went down. They went down, baby. Like, it was not looking too hot for Kenner. And Kenner, they had a great run. They really got lightning in a bottle with Star Wars toys and signing that deal with Lucas. But I think their good fortune kind of ran out, and they ended up selling the company to a bigwig that originally passed on Star Wars toys in Hasbro. So now it's the late 90s, and Hasbro owns the rights to Star Wars toys. Now you're probably wondering, Lee, what the heck are you talking about? You haven't even mentioned Lego in 10 minutes. Trust me, I'm getting there, because we are coming up on the late 90s, and George Lucas announces for the first time in a decade and a half there's going to be a new Star Wars movie. That's right, baby. Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, is on the horizon. And this is the prequel to the OG Star Wars films, the original Star Wars trilogy. This is it. We are getting a new Star Wars movie. And because of that, Hasbro's freaking out, man. Hasbro's got this new property in Star Wars toys, and what are they going to do when they know that they have this property and they have this movie coming out? Of course, they are going to make a lot of Star Wars toys. So the amount of money that Hasbro pumps into making Star Wars toys is crazy. And with the release of The Phantom Menace, they make a lot. A lot of Star Wars toys. It is bonanza. It's a frenzy yet again. But it's not just the action figures and playsets. We got things like Micro Machines coming out. Nerf guns are getting in on the Star Wars toy game. There's those weird bottle cup toppers that movie theaters are selling. Happy Meal toys. There's a lot of stuff going on for Star Wars products here. And one of the new products that came out for Star Wars in 1999, of course, is, say it with me, Lego. Lego finally jumps on the Star Wars bandwagon. They are on the Star Wars train for the first time ever. And this is kind of weird. This is significant for Lego. Lego as a company really didn't want to do this sort of thing. If you watch that Toys That Made Us episode about Lego, you would know that Lego, one, is very anti-war. Lego hates war. They actually made their original castle sets yellow instead of gray because they didn't want a ton of gray pieces out there for people to make custom tanks and war machines out of Lego pieces. Obviously that changed in the future, but Lego is super anti-war. And Lego at this point in time is almost against making any form of licensed product. Again, ironic to think about now because licensed products rule Lego as an industry. But back in the 90s, Lego's bread and butter was original themes. Stuff like classic Lego space, castle, westerns, ninjas, underwater stuff, you name it. Classic Lego stuff, city stuff, in-house themes, original properties that Lego created themselves. That is what Lego stood for. That's what Lego wanted to produce. And Star Wars, of course, is the biggest property in the world. So for Lego to make something, one, that has the name war in it, like it literally has the word war in it, even though it's, laser swords, lightsabers, and blasters, it's not real weapons, it's still war, and it's, heavily influenced by real life wars like World War II. It's very significant for Lego to, quote unquote, sell out, which, I'm very happy they did this because I wouldn't be recording this podcast if they didn't. But they sold out and they finally bit the bullet and they're like, all right, it's time to make Star Wars toys. And it's very significant because the late 90s and the early 2000s, this is a pretty commonly known Lego fact, it's a bad time for Lego, man. Again, there's a lot of irony in this episode because looking back on this, it just seems weird, but Lego was struggling as a company. Lego now is the #1 toy brand in the world. The Lego brand is the most recognized brand in the world. It's more popular than Ferrari. Like, Lego is that big. But back in the day, back in the late 90s and the early 2000s when Star Wars Lego first started to come out, Lego was struggling. People were not buying Lego quite as much as they were, and they were experimenting with a lot of things and failing, and Lego actually almost went under. They almost sold Lego to a bigwig toy company. It's crazy to think about because of how popular Lego is today. But back in the day, Lego really was not doing too hot, and there are a couple of things that can be accredited to Lego's turnaround as a company. Bionicle is one, and we will definitely talk about Bionicle in the future of this podcast, but Star Wars is another huge reason. Star Wars is, still to this day, the most popular Lego theme of all time. It is. It's the highest selling Lego theme of all time. Year in and year out, it's the most popular Lego theme. And Star Wars Episode 1 is the reason for it. Because there's a new Star Wars film coming out, Lego finally decides to make products based off Star Wars. Now, Star Wars toys for The Phantom Menace have a strange history because of The Phantom Menace as a film. Now, this is a title I'm about to give The Phantom Menace, and it's up for some debate, but I still think it holds this title today, and that is the title of most anticipated movie of all time. 16 years. There were 16 years between the end of the original trilogy and the beginning of the prequel trilogy. That is the single longest gap between Star Wars films ever. It's the longest gap ever. It was almost 2 decades worth where there were no new Star Wars theatrical releases. So to say the hype for a new Star Wars film after all this time was huge is an understatement. The Phantom Menace was anticipated by, I think, just about everybody and their mama in the entire world. People are freaking out about this film. And then the film comes out. Now look, I think The Phantom Menace, the only movies that could really compete with the anticipation level for it would be Episode 7, The Force Awakens, or maybe Avengers Endgame. But both those movies have something that The Phantom Menace didn't, and that was very good critical reception. Like, Force Awakens has 90-something% Rotten Tomatoes. Endgame also has like 95%. Those are very well-received movies. The Phantom Menace, while I think it is still to this day is the most anticipated movie of all time, I also think you could debate this is the biggest disappointment in cinematic history. Now, personally, I love The Phantom Menace. I love The Phantom Menace not because of the quality of film, but because of nostalgia. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I literally grew up with this film. I watched this film all the time when I was a kid. I had the toys. Like, this film means a lot to me and my childhood. Now, I majored in, kind of film production in college. I'm a big movie guy, and as much as I love this movie because of nostalgia's sake, I can admit it's not really a good movie. There are a ton of problems with this movie. There's some great stuff in it, but there's a ton of issues with this film, which led to this movie, I think, being the biggest letdown in film history. The Phantom Menace, very unfortunately, came out and it really disappointed a ton. I mean, a ton of people. And the toy sales were very affected by this. Now, before the movie came out, they did their typical thing that they do now, like Force Friday. It wasn't called that back then, but they released the toys, I believe, in March. So the movie came out in May of 99. The toys came out in early March. So a couple months before the release of the film, and yet again, I keep using this word, there was a frenzy to get these Phantom Menace toys. People were flocking to the stores. Toys were selling out. It was pandemonium. Star Wars toys were back, baby. And then the movie came out, and all of a sudden everyone's like, wait a second, Jar Jar Binks was kind of terrible. Watto was kind of horrible. Wait, this movie wasn't very good. Oh. All of a sudden, kids and collectors didn't really want a Jar Jar or a Sebulba action figure. They didn't want the young Anakin merchandise or Gungan vehicles. And you know what happened? You know what happened, y'all? The toy sales plummeted. For the first time pretty much ever in Star Wars toys. Star Wars toys are now going on clearance. Old Toys R Us's have bins full of old Phantom Menace toys piling up on mega clearances because they just want to get rid of this stuff. And the Phantom Menace toys are not hard to find. Phantom Menace toys are actually super common. You can go on eBay and you can find them for very cheap. And I guarantee you, if you go to the nearest antique or thrift store around you, an antique shop, they're going to have a weird little toy section near the back of the store, and they're going to have a number of Phantom Menace action figures. I guarantee that's going to happen. Every antique store I've ever been in always has these figures, and they're always selling them for $4.99 in today's currency, which is cheaper than what they were back in 1999. Phantom Menace toys plummeted. The sales were not good. And unfortunately for Lego, they finally made Star Wars toys, but the first big wave of Star Wars toys, the majority of sets they made, were based off now this very disappointing Star Wars film in The Phantom Menace. Now, Lego was smart, and not only did they release Phantom Menace stuff, they also released sets based off of the original trilogy. So they made, land speeders and snow speeders, X-Wings and TIE fighters and Y-Wings and all that good stuff. They made that stuff, and that stuff sold well. That stuff has appreciated in value a lot. But Phantom Menace stuff, not so much. So the Phantom Menace, all of a sudden, for Lego, is kind of this disappointment, and you can see that it was a disappointment in the number of toys they made, because they clearly had a plan to make a bunch of Episode 1 toys, but then after a couple of years, it was like, screw Episode 1, we're just going to stop doing that, and we're going to focus on, the Star Wars stuff people actually like. So, let's dive in to dissecting all of the Phantom Menace sets Lego has ever produced. Now, according to Brickset, Lego has made, up to this point, 41 Episode 1 sets. So, a pretty good amount. It is actually 42 if you count the UCS Naboo Starfighter, which obviously you should. That one's just listed under the UCS sub-theme rather than Episode 1. So that's a lot of sets. But the biggest wave to this date, Episode 1 sets ever, was the first one. They actually released 8 sets based off Episode 1 in 1999. Now, this is significant because this is a bigger wave than we've gotten for any of the sequel trilogy Disney-era Star Wars stuff. The biggest waves we've gotten are 7 sets from The Force Awakens and 7 sets from The Last Jedi. So those ones had 7 sets. Episode 1 got 8 all the way 21 years ago. So that is pretty significant, and they really covered a lot of ground with this first wave of Episode 1 sets. You had sets ranging from price points of $6 all the way to $90, and these are unadjusted for inflation prices, the original prices of these sets. Now, the first set is the lightsaber duel. This set, to this day, I think is absolutely fabulous. This set is great because it was a $6 set that came with Darth Maul on his speeder, Qui-Gon Jinn, and a moisture evaporator. It's a small little scene in a very small, cheap set, but you get one of the main heroes and the main villains of the film in an iconic lightsaber scene on Tatooine. I mean, that is a great set, and LEGO does not make stuff like that anymore. I mean, they make, $20, $30 versions of stuff like this, but for $6, that is really hard to beat. Also, for $6, they made what they call a droid fighter. Now, I think any Star Wars fan can tell you that droid fighter isn't really an accurate name. These things are, of course, called vulture droids. They've made plenty of them in the future. We'll talk about another one later on in this video. This was $6, a great purchase. No figures, but a great thing for the collection. And you can already see LEGO is really committing to this wave because they're making these small sets that they're probably hoping will sell very well, but then they're also making some bigger, more specific scenes. But continuing on with the small sets, for $10 back in '99, we had the Naboo Swamp. This set had 4 figures for $10, which is like battle pack material. That's really good. And the 4 figures were 2 battle droids on staps. So you got 2 staps, not 1 but 2, which is great for army building. And a stap stands for a single trooper aerial platform. So it's like, those vehicles the battle droids stand on and they, speed around. Really cool little vehicles. You also got, I believe, Qui-Gon Jinn in another cheap set. It might have been Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's either one of those two. I actually can't remember. And then, of course, this was the cheapest set you could get. Jar Jar Binks in. Now, Jar Jar Binks is a very significant LEGO figure in the history of LEGO figures. And here's why. Jar Jar Binks is the first ever LEGO figure to have a specially molded head. Before this, every LEGO figure, normal LEGO figure ever, had the typical LEGO minifig head. But Jar Jar Binks, obviously, I don't really think his head would translate very well to that style, so LEGO had to make a brand new mold for just his head. And this mold is so good. This is such a good mold that they're still using it to this day. They have never redone the Gungan head mold. Now, in '99, the Jar Jar head mold was tan with no details. It was all molded details, but there was no printed details. And they have since added printing to make it look, more realistic to the film. But they're still using that exact same headpiece, which I think is really cool. And as much as you might hate Jar Jar Binks and might hate this figure because of it, this figure is significant. And any minifigure now, any great figure, like a Trolls minifigure or whatever, now that has a specially molded head, you need to go back in time and thank Jar Jar Binks for that. Because without him, maybe we wouldn't have any of those figures today. So I think that's a really fun little tidbit about the Jar Jar Binks figure. Now, for $15 in this original wave, we had Anakin's pod racer. I think this is one of the most desirable things in the set because the pod race scene, still to this day, is one of the best scenes in The Phantom Menace. It's a great scene. It really holds up, and even though the movie might not be great, that scene is still great. And Anakin's pod racer, $15 for an iconic vehicle. That's a fantastic deal. Great set. It came with Anakin, a pit droid, and Padme. A lot of good characters, a lot of good stuff. And kind of a weird thing, we're going to talk about that pod racer in just a minute because the same design actually comes in a different set in this wave, which is very odd. For $20, there was the original Naboo Starfighter. Now, the Naboo Starfighter is, of course, I think one of the most, if not the most iconic ships from Episode 1. It's a great ship. It's a beautiful ship. LEGO has made it a lot, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But the Naboo Starfighter is an iconic ship from Episode 1. Great $20 set with Anakin and some battle droids. But this set, if you are following along, if you're listening to this in the car, don't, get on Google and look up the images. But if you're at home listening to this or watching on YouTube, go to brickset.com, look up this '99 Naboo Starfighter set because it sucks. It's really bad. It's a terrible set. Some of these designs actually hold up pretty well today by old LEGO standards. The Naboo Starfighter is not one of them. That ship is so sleek in the movie. So seeing that vehicle just be so ridiculously blocky is kind of hilarious, and it looks really bad. So the Naboo Starfighter, unfortunately, does not hold up. Speaking of not holding up, the $30 original Sith Infiltrator also looks pretty bad. Kind of like the original TIE Fighters, this one had a lot of blue accent details, which is just not accurate to the film, and it's super blocky. It does not look very good. It was $30. It only came with Darth Maul, and we already mentioned Darth Maul came in a much cheaper $6 set. There was no real good reason to buy this one. I think this is probably the worst set of the original wave. Now for $50, we got the Gungan sub. I love the Gungan sub as a ship because it's so unique in Star Wars, because Star Wars is full of speeders, walkers, and of course spaceships. Getting something that's a submarine? Like, really? A submarine? That is so different and unique. And it was a really cool sequence to have the whole underwater world on Naboo with the Gungans. And the Gungan sub is such a unique ship. I think that's a great set. It actually holds up pretty well today as well. And finally, the biggest set of the original line was the Mos Espa Pod Race. This set was $90, a very large set by 1999 standards. It came with Gasgano's Pod Racer, which I think this is like the only time we've ever gotten Gasgano's Pod, so that was a very unique part of this set. We also got Sebulba's Pod Racer, and Sebulba, kind of like how Jar Jar was the first like custom molded head, Sebulba was a completely custom molded piece, a very unique piece for a Lego figure. And we also got Anakin's Pod. Now the weird thing is, like I mentioned, we already got Anakin's Pod in a smaller set, and this was the same design. So if you bought both sets, you had two, which is kind of weird, but I think it's a good thing because they made it very accessible and easy to get the original Anakin's Pod Racer without having to buy the giant set. But if you're a completionist and you want to collect the entire wave, I could see why some people might be a little bit peeved that they just put the exact same design. Now, this doesn't really come with too much of Mos Espa. It has a couple small side builds and lots of minifigures. For the most part, it focuses in on the 3 pod racers, and I think to this day, this is a fantastic set. I wish I had this set. It's a set I've always wanted. It's a great set, and I would love to see LEGO remake something like it in the near future. Now, let's move on, because that was the 1999 wave of Phantom Menace sets. Obviously, all of this stuff was planned way before the movie came out and before LEGO knew that this movie was going to be a big letdown and the toy sales were going to plummet. Now, I'm assuming the second wave that came out in the year 2000 was also probably planned even before the movie came out, because LEGO probably had the idea in their head that Episode 1's going to be huge, everyone's going to love it, and everyone's going to want the toys. And of course, it didn't happen. Episode 1 came out, it wasn't it was a financial success. I mean, it made $1 billion 21 years ago, but the toy sales, like I've already mentioned, just were not nearly as high as people had hoped they were. So LEGO probably planned this second wave, a big second wave, with the idea that they're going to capitalize more on the success of Episode 1 toys, and then it didn't happen. So the second wave included the Gungan Patrol. This was a small $10 set that came with Jar Jar Binks. This is a great set, man. I think it's a really, really good set because it came with a Cadu. This is the only time LEGO has ever made a Cadu figure. They have yet to remake it in like 20 years. I would love to see it made again. And of course, Cadu, I think now you can buy the ribs of Cadus for eating at Galaxy's Edge at Disney World and Disneyland, which is kind of funny. But yeah, Cadus are those weird like bird, ostrich creatures that the Gungans ride around on. Really weird looking creature, but it's a cool LEGO mold, and I think this is, again, one of the first like creature molds ever in LEGO for Star Wars, so that's a great piece that's still exclusive to this set today. I do have, I think, a couple of this set in my collection because I know I have those Cadu figures lying around somewhere. Also, for $10 that year, we got the original Flash Speeder. I love the Flash Speeder. It's so green. Green is one of my favorite colors, and the Flash Speeder is just strikingly green. And it's a very simple speeder design, but it's green, and it looks great. It came with a Naboo officer. Not a super complicated set, but a cool one nonetheless. And then, one of the most beloved original LEGO Star Wars sets of all time, we got the $20 original AAT. This set, the Trade Federation AAT, is one of the best LEGO Star Wars sets ever, in my opinion. The reason is because it holds up today. This design does not look 20 years old. It still looks good by 2020 Lego standards, and that is absolutely remarkable, in my opinion. And the sad thing is, the remake of it that happened 15 years later, in 2015, that we'll talk about in a minute here, the remake of this vehicle wasn't as good. It just wasn't as good. And it's very sad that this vehicle here was so good 20 years ago, and then 15 years later, they made a version that was somehow worse? Like, how does that happen, Lego? Come on. That is weak. But high praise for the original AAT. Also in this wave, we got kind of a weird one. It was called the Star Wars Bucket. It was like, it came with Anakin, and I think it came with a couple of pod race parts, and you could like build pod racers and make your own custom pods. Kind of a weird thing. Lego hasn't really done any more of this sort of thing for Star Wars, so I'm assuming this set did not sell well. Very strange set. That was $25. And finally, we got the Trade Federation MTT. Now, the MTT, we're going to talk about the MTT a little bit later on in this episode, because the MTT has a very important place in LEGO Star Wars history, but not this one. The original MTT was $50. The vehicle was obviously very brown in the movie, but the original one was like a mix of brown with tan and grays. It was ugly. It was really ugly, and unlike the AAT, it does not hold up today. A pretty horrible design. One of the worst original Episode 1 sets, maybe besides that Sith Infiltrator that we already mentioned. Now, after 2000, the amount of Episode 1 sets LEGO produced for the next 6 years was very, very low. From 2001 to 2006, that little 6-year time frame, we got 4. 4 Episode 1 sets. We had gotten 13 prior in the past 2 years. And then after that, for the next 6, we just get 4 Episode 1 sets, which is kind of pathetic, but also very understandable because of the sales for the toys of this film. So those 4 sets are the $10 Battle Droid Troop Carrier, which has been remade a couple of times. Great little kind of precursor to the Battle Pack. It had the vehicle that you do see during the Battle of Naboo with, I think, 7 Battle Droid figures. Great set. And then one set that came out in 2001. It's a set that I've always wanted. I just never gotten around to purchasing it because I don't want to spend the big bucks on eBay. That is Watto's Junkyard. A weird set. And one, it's the first time we ever got a Watto figure, which it took 3 years for LEGO to actually make a Watto figure for Episode 1, even though he's a pretty prominent character in the film. This set also comes with a pod racer, which is really cool. It was a $50 set back in the day, a very unique set, and was another opportunity to add another pod racer to the ever-growing kind of Mos Espa pod race display. So it's a really cool set. It's one that I still want today and has never been remade. So a very unique set and a very cool set. 2002, this is the last year for a while that we saw any LEGO Star Wars Episode 1 sets officially under that sub-theme. We got 2 sets this year, and there were 2 sets that were kind of meant to go together. They were called Jedi Defense 1 and Jedi Defense 2. That's the name of the sets. They also did this for the OT. They had Final Duel 1 and Final Duel 2 based off of Episode 6, The Return of the Jedi. These ones are based off the Phantom Menace. And these sets here, the first one was Obi-Wan Kenobi and 2 droidicas. Now this is the first time I think they made droidicas in LEGO form. It was a pretty cool brick-built design that used a lot of the Battle Droid arm piece in light gray and some brown pieces to make them. Pretty cool thing. Droidicas are pretty cool. And it came with Obi-Wan Kenobi. And that was it. There wasn't really like an actual build. It was just 3 figures. The second version came with 2 Battle Droid officers, Qui-Gon Jinn, and a little door, like the door on the Trade Federation ship at the beginning of the movie that they cut through. So the door, pretty underwhelming build, couple minifigures, and this was, of course, just supposed to set up the scene from the beginning of The Phantom Menace in Episode 1, where Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan destroy all these droidicas and battle droids. It was kind of cool. They're both $7 each, again, kind of like precursors to battle packs. Good scene, very, very cheap way to get those main characters. Little weird that they came out in 2002, because this, of course, was the release of Episode 2 that year, but they came out a little bit before that movie came out. Interesting sets, and those were all she wrote for Star Wars Episode 1 sets for a while. LEGO didn't make any for 5 years, besides one. In 2003, this is technically, according to Brickset, not listed under the sub-theme of Episode 1 because it's actually an Ultimate Collector Series set. I believe it's the only Ultimate Collector Series set besides the Darth Maul bus, which also wasn't listed under Episode 1. This set that we're talking about is the UCS Naboo Starfighter. Now, this is a weird UCS set because it's to this day the cheapest UCS set. It was $40 because it came with 187 pieces. So that price per piece is horrible. It's over 20 cents per piece. The reason this set was so expensive, though, is because it had chrome pieces. It's the only Naboo Starfighter LEGO has ever made with the accurate chrome pieces to recreate the exterior. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. For some reason, though, they did have an R2-D2 head, but the cockpit was actually just made of black pieces instead of transparent parts, so you couldn't put an actual pilot in there, which is just weird to me. I felt that was a big missed opportunity, but it's still a great set. It's a set I wish I had because of those sick chrome pieces, and those parts are very expensive on aftermarkets. But from 2002 to 2007, besides that UCS Naboo Starfighter, there was nothing from LEGO Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And then LEGO remade sets from that film for the first time in 2007. So these sets were coming about 7 or 8 years after their original counterparts. So we got our first remake of the Naboo Starfighter in the normal minifig scale non-UCS. This Naboo Starfighter was $10 more. It was now $30. However, it also included a Vulture droid. It had Anakin Skywalker, R2, a Vulture droid, and the Naboo Starfighter. I love this set. I think to this day, this is the best normal Naboo Starfighter set because it creates a really cool battle scene for a very good price. Because the Vulture droid back in the day was $6. So getting that in Naboo Starfighter back in the day would have been $26, but adjusted for inflation, $30 seems very fair for this set. And I have a great story about this set. A little anecdote that I want to share with you guys here real quick. In 2007, I was about 10 years old, and I saved up all my money to order the LEGO Hoth Echo base set. They made a really cool Echo base set back then, and I ordered that set. It was $50. I got it from Lego.com. It came in the mail. I was excited to build it, and to my dismay, somehow, this is like one of the only times this has ever happened to me, not only was a piece missing. I mean, LEGO is very good with their piece quality control. Usually all the pieces are always there. But this set was not only missing a piece, it was missing one of the big white base plates that was used to make the base. So I just legitimately could not build it. I could not build this set because I didn't have the base plate piece. And LEGO customer service is super kind. If you're ever missing anything, if there's ever a problem with your purchases from LEGO, just contact customer service. They're super chill, they're super nice, and they will kindly give you what they want. So they sent me the piece in the mail. And because they forgot the piece, they were like, you know what? We're also going to give you a free keychain. They gave me a free keychain, I believe, of the clone pilot figure from the V-Wing set that year, but they actually sent this package to the wrong address. They sent it to our old address, and we had moved but from away from that house, and they sent it to the wrong address. We were like, hey, LEGO, it never came. And they're like, actually it did. And we're like, where'd you send it? And they're like, we sent it to this address. And they're like, oh my gosh, we sent it to the wrong place. So because they sent it to the wrong address, they were so apologetic that they sent me the piece again. They sent me the keychain again. And they're like, you know what? For your trouble, because we messed up so bad, we're going to send you a free 2007 Naboo Starfighter set. So because LEGO forgot to give me that piece with the Echo base set, I got the 2007 Naboo Starfighter set for free. And I was 10 years old. This was like a dream come true because I was never going to be able to afford that set. And it was awesome to get that set. Okay, that's a little side story over. That set has a special place in my heart because of that story. Also that year, for $30, we had the first remake of the Sith Infiltrator. Now, remakes of Sith Infiltrators and Naboo Starfighters have kind of become a meme, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. The Sith Infiltrator remake is pretty bad. This version in 2007 It's a weird design. It's very clunky and put together oddly. I am not a big fan of that. Also that year, for $90, I believe a Toys R Us exclusive at the time, we got the Republic Cruiser, which I think I got for either my birthday or Christmas that year, because it's a big set. Great set, great representation of that vehicle. I remember the vehicle being a little bit flimsy back in the day, like it didn't stay together super well, but I also was young and probably just built it wrong. Unfortunately, I was a dumb kid and completely destroyed that set, because I wish I had that still on display in my collection, because LEGO has never made it again. That vehicle has never been made again in LEGO form. Hopefully they remake it here in the next few years or so, because I do love that vehicle and I think it's super cool. But LEGO has yet to remake that set to this day, 13 years later. And then finally, the fourth and final Episode 1 set from the year 2007 is the Trade Federation MTT, the remake of that set that came out in the year 2000. This set, I asked my followers on Instagram, what's your favorite set from Episode 1? And a lot of people voted for Sith Infiltrators, Naboo Starfighters, and some other sets I haven't mentioned yet. But the resounding number one choice by a mile, and I am inclined to agree with y'all, the Trade Federation MTT set from 2007 is to this day considered to be the best set from Star Wars Episode 1. It was a $100 set with 1,350-ish pieces, which that piece count today would make it be like a $160 set. It had 21 Battle Droid figures. That is insane. That's so many Battle Droid minifigures included with this set. This was the ultimate design. And this design, again, I implore you, if you don't know what it looks like, look it up. It was a spectacular design. I mean, seriously, such a good design that still holds up to this day. I think LEGO could repackage this set with updated pieces and minifigures, and it would look just as good as it did in 2007. No one would complain. It looks like a design that could pass by 2020 LEGO Star Wars standards. That set is just that good. Now, for another few years, LEGO didn't really make again any Star Wars Episode 1 sets. They kind of stopped making them. And then in 2011, 4 years later, they had another small wave of 4 sets spread across a couple of different waves for Episode 1. Now, the important thing to remember here is, back before Disney purchased Lucasfilm, 20th Century Fox, which ironically Disney now owns as well, they were planning on re-releasing all the Star Wars movies in 3D. So in 2012, they actually re-released Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, in 3D. I saw it in 3D. I still have my Darth Maul Collector's 3D glasses. It was my second viewing, because a little fun fact about The Phantom Menace, another reason that movie means a lot to me, is according to my parents, I don't remember this because I was like 2 years old at the time, but according to my parents and my family, the first movie I ever saw in theaters when I was 2 years old was Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. It's almost like they took me to see that movie and that paved the way for the rest of my life. It's like they were setting me up to be a humongous Star Wars nerd back when I was 2 years old. So the movie holds a special place in my heart because I not only saw it in '99 as the first movie theater experience of my life, but I also saw it in 2012 when it was re-released in 3D. Now, later in 2012, Disney purchased Lucasfilm and they canceled all the plans for re-releasing the Star Wars movies in 3D. They were going to re-release in 2013 the Episode 2 sets, which is why there was a big Episode 2 wave in 2013, and why in 2014 there was a big Episode 3 wave. They were going to do it one a year. They canceled all of that, which is kind of unfortunate because I would have loved to have seen those movies in 3D in theaters again, but whatever. I digress. So for 2011, they kind of, because they were going to re-release the movie, I think LEGO kind of planned to make a bunch of Episode 1 sets. So they made another Naboo Starfighter. Now this was just 4 years removed from the last one. This one did not include a Vulture droid, but it was $20 more. It only had about 50 more pieces, but somehow had a $20 increase in price, and it became a $50 set. That is a horribly priced set, and I completely skipped on this one because of that reason. They also made a set they called the Battle of Naboo, which is essentially just a remake of the Battle Droid Troop Carrier. It was a $25 set. It came with a lot of Battle Droid figures. Also came with a Gungan Warrior and Jar Jar Binks. And the Gungan Warrior had a really cool shield mold for their, purple shields. That was a great piece, great set. The Sith Infiltrator was remade. I also skipped on this version because it was $70. Really expensive price, more than twice as much as the previous two. More than the previous two combined, ironically enough. This set, I think, to this day is the only set to ever come with Captain Panaka, and I really, 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 really wish I had that figure, but unfortunately I skipped on this set because the design just isn't great. And then I think clearly the best Episode 1 set, and one of the best Episode 1 sets they've ever made, was the 2011 version of Anakin and Sebulba's Pod Racers. A $90 set. I got this set with my YouTube money back in the day on the way back from Brick Fair 2011, so that set kind of has a special place in my heart. It's a fantastic set. The designs, they did remake the Anakin's Pod Racer, we'll talk about in a minute, but the Solo's Pod Racer, that's the most recent version of that vehicle, and the design still holds up today. Unfortunately, again, I think I threw that set in a box, and it kind of fell apart, and I don't have it built anymore. I really wish I did. But that is a fantastic set from 2011. Now, in 2012, which is the year Episode 1 was actually re-released, the box art for LEGO Star Wars that year had Darth Maul on it. It's kind of weird, but the box art had Darth Maul on it, and it was this Episode 1 themed box art that still looks really cool. I love that box art. But they actually only released one set from Episode 1. So only one set from this entire year's had box art that, made sense for what the set was. And that was the first and only ever remake of the Naboo Gungan sub. I love this set. It was an expensive set, but I love it because I think the design, one, is really creative and looks great, but it's also the only Queen Amidala figure LEGO has ever made. This Queen Amidala figure has a crazy custom headpiece and a crazy custom dress piece. It's an absolutely fantastic looking minifigure, and the figure is worth a lot of money. I'm not going to sell mine because it's a very important minifigure to me, but if I wanted to, I could make a lot of money for this figure. That figure is worth a ton. And of course, that set is worth a lot as well because of that figure. Now, for the next few years, there wasn't really much. Besides, in 2014, there was a Toys R Us exclusive set that I remember specifically purchasing after I was babysitting. I was babysitting somebody, and it was for a fairly wealthy kid, or family. It had a wealthy family with a kid, and they paid me way too much money. They paid me a lot of money to babysit, and I got so much money, I just didn't know what to do with this. I went to Toys R Us and bought this MTT, which this version was $10 cheaper than the one that came out 7 years prior, but it had, I think, about 400 less pieces, I think 12 less Battle Droid figures, and it does not look as good. It's better than the original version, and I don't think it's terrible. It has some good functions, and it's not a horrible design, and I'm glad to have an MTT in my collection, but unfortunately, this remake is not as good as the original version, or not as good as the 2007 version of this same vehicle. I'm happy to have it, but it's not a great set, and I think a lot of people consider this to be one of the more disappointing sets from LEGO Star Wars. Speaking of disappointing sets from LEGO Star Wars, we're getting towards the end here of the catalog Episode 1 sets. 2015, we got a $25, the first and only remake of the Episode 1 Trade Federation AAT. Now, I already mentioned this earlier when I raved about the version that came out in 2000. The 2015 version sucks. It had no exclusive figures, the design doesn't look good, it's missing tons of details. That is a horrible set, and unfortunately, I still own it, but it's the only AAT that I own, and I wish I had a better version of it. I don't want to shell out the big bucks for the 2000 version. Also that year, we got another Battle Droid Troop Carrier, just 4 years after the last one. This one was bigger. It had 15 Battle Droid figs. It was a fantastic set. Great design. It was $40, but it had almost 600 pieces. Really, really good deal. That was a great set. And we also got the only remake ever of the Flash Speeder. I've already talked about how I love the Flash Speeder. I love its green color scheme. The remake, it was 3 times as much. It was $30, but it was a good deal. It's a great design. Cool vehicle. Had a lot of figures, and I'm glad to have that in my collection. And then, yet again, it was almost like LEGO Star Wars with Episode 1 was on this weird 4-year cycle. 2007, 4 years later. 2011, 4 years later. 2015, we got another Naboo Starfighter and another Sith Infiltrator. They just keep making these vehicles, man. 2019, this past year, I was like, is Lego going to do it again? It's the 4-year rotation. They did not actually remake another Naboo Starfighter Sith Infiltrator, thankfully, because I don't think anybody really needs one of those in their collection right now. I'm sure they'll remake it again in a few years, but it will be a bigger gap in time before we get the new ones. These, I think, are the better versions. I mean, the Naboo Starfighter, I still like the 2007 set more because of the nostalgia for me and the price, but this is a good design for it, and it came with a lot of figures, some Droidekas, and some cool, like, base stuff. It was a much better deal for $50 than the version that came out in 2011. The Sith Infiltrator, again, had a big price jump all the way to $90. And this set, another little anecdote I had to share with you guys. In 2016, I ordered a bunch of sets on May 4th, for the May the 4th be with you Lego promotion figure. Ordered a bunch of sets off Lego.com, and I got my package, and the sets I ordered were pretty small, and my package felt really heavy, and I was like, why is my package so heavy? Opened up my package, and I got not one, but two Naboo Starfighters from Lego for free. They just accidentally sent me 2 Naboo Starfighters. I don't know why, I don't know how. I gave them away to friends, because I already had this set myself, I didn't need it. They just sent it to me by accident. At first, I was like, I should contact Lego and send them back. And I was like, you know what? I've given Lego so much money over the years, I'm going to keep these things. That was a crazy moment, and there probably is someone out there that ordered 2, not Naboo Starfighters, it was the Sith Infiltrator. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I got 2 free Sith Infiltrators, but there's probably somebody out there who ordered 2 Sith Infiltrators to do something with them. Maybe one for his kid and one for him to keep. And unfortunately, that guy or gal did not get their package in the mail, which just kind of makes me sad. But that's a little funny story about that Sith Infiltrator. Now, we're getting close to the end. There's only 2 more sets to talk about, not counting like random polybags and stuff that we're not going to mention because who really cares? 2017, we got 1 set. It actually took so long for them to make a set of this, 18 years. They made a set that they called the Duel on Naboo. It's the Duel of the Fates. It's Obi-Wan. It's Qui-Gon. It's Darth Maul. It was a $25 set. A small little playset representation of this iconic scene from the film. It was an okay set. A lot of people actually listed this as one of their favorite sets from Lego Star Wars Episode 1, the sub-theme, which I thought was kind of interesting, because I thought this set was an underwhelming and way too small of a design. I wish it was bigger. But yeah, people love that set. I personally don't, but it's a good set, it's a decent set, and it's of course a great scene. It is great to get that scene in Lego form. And finally, the final set we can talk about, the most recent Episode 1 set for the 20th anniversary of Lego Star Wars this past year in 2019. Thankfully, Lego actually didn't make a set based off Episode 2, which was kind of disappointing, but thankfully, they did make a set to honor Episode 1, which makes sense because Episode 1 is what kicked off Lego Star Wars 20 years ago, now 21 years ago. In 99, it made perfect sense to make this into a set. They remade Anakin's pod racer based off the version that came out in 99, 20 years later. This version was $30, so it was twice as much, but it did have a big jump in piece count. Had the same 2 minifigures, when Padme had a new hairpiece. Unfortunately, it did not have a pit droid. They did not include a pit droid in this set, which is the one thing I think it's missing that the original set had. But it's a great updated design, still a pretty cheap way to get this iconic vehicle, and I'm really glad they made that set over again. So there you have it. That is Lego Star Wars Episode 1, the history of sets from this film. Please tell me what you thought. If you're on Instagram or YouTube, leave a comment, and also, of course, follow me on YouTube, follow me on Instagram, follow me wherever this podcast is being posted, like the post, share it with friends, and thank you so much for listening and making me a part of your day. And if you want to support me, I do have a Patreon account. I don't have too many patrons right now, but any donation, like literally $1, helps to make more podcasts of this type. So thank you so much for listening to the first ever episode of Brickology. I hope this wasn't too bad. I hope you learned something today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye-bye.